here so more people are in. Okay, Councillor Appleton just asked me to start, and he'll join us in just a minute. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is a special committee of the whole. We are terming it a town hall, an opportunity to meet with members of our community. As we're gathering here, we are gathered on the traditional territories of the Coast and the Strait Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, and recognize that their historic connections to these lands and waters continues to this day. For those of you who are joining us here, this is really all about you. It's just giving you a chance to talk to members of council and ask questions. We've had a few questions submitted by email, and we'll certainly get to those, and we'll take questions in here. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you're online here, if you're in the Zoom application, you can use the reactions tab at the bottom of the Zoom, and that will allow you to raise hands, and we'll go to you for questions or comments. If you're dialed in, if you're listening to us in terms of calling into the 185, whatever the toll-free number or the local number, then you can hit *9 to raise your hand, and that's we'll recognize it'll pop up on my screen here and be able to call on you. When I call on you, if you just state your name and municipality of residence for the record, that would be helpful. This is an informal meeting, so we have a chance to have dialogues and conversations with people. And as the mayor, I am the official spokesperson for council, but I'm bound to miss some information in my comments, and I'm sure there's points of interest that council wants to raise as well as things go on. So I'm going to provide a couple of opportunities here for council to jump in as well and just fill in gaps or raise points that they want to talk about. In just a minute, I'm just going to call on them to just introduce themselves as well. So if anybody, I think a lot of people haven't met their councillors since we've been locked away a little bit in the last couple of years. So I'll give a chance for people to introduce themselves with the face, put a face to the name. Also, just a little point that we are very happy to talk about housing and anything to do with housing. We're a little bit constrained in talking about specific or active housing applications, so we'll do our best to answer questions, but there may be some limits to what we can talk about when it comes to specific housing lots. And also want to note that we have a number of staff with us today to take notes. We have our Chief Administrative Officer, Lou Varela, with us as well this evening. So just want to express my appreciation to council for all the work that's been going on over the last 3 years between the council and staff. It's been a busy 3 years to date, and this has been a very high functioning and productive term on council. Certainly, I want to just express that I recognize that it's been a little hard for everybody, but I also recognize that it feels a little bit like we're coming out of the peak of it. I hope that's true. I was just having a conversation today with members of staff and going over all the events. They're all back this year, which is fantastic. So we're looking at all of the music in the park evenings, the pianos, the public pianos being out in the community, the public art, the Arts Alive, new sculptures coming out, the tours. Of course, all the community events, things like the night markets in the village and the Belker Creek Brush Up, and of course the Tea Party are all going forward, it looks like. So knock on wood, we never know for sure. But it's nice just to see that opportunity for bumping into people and seeing people at events once again. I'm just going to give the opportunity just to introduce our councillors, if that's okay. If you are willing to just step forward and just put a face to names, that way people who are here joining us can see you. I'm going to go in the order I have on my screen, if that's okay. So Councillor Patterson, why don't you introduce yourself, maybe just very briefly say how long you've been on council and maybe a couple of the committees and things that you work as liaison for.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome to everyone who is joining us tonight. Thank you for participating in this town hall. I look forward to hearing your questions. I'm Councillor Esther Patterson. This is my first term serving on Oak Bay Council, and I am council liaison to the Advisory Planning Commission here in Oak Bay. And I am also a council liaison to Victoria Family Court Youth Justice Committee within the CRD, the regional committee, and also on CRESS, the Emergency Communication Services I serve as Oak Bay's liaison to that committee, and I chair their finance committee, and I'm on the executive board and the new building committee. So it's a bit of a handful, but certainly getting to know a lot of the people in the region, and that's a very enjoyable part of the serving with Oak Bay Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Yeah, I'm Councillor Braithwaite. I'm in my fourth term on council. I have a few committees that I sit on. The main one that I was on, which was Parks, Rec and Culture, actually got disbanded last year, but I was on that one, and the Public Art Committee. I'm the alternate to the Business Liaison, the CRD, Greater Victoria Labour Relations. I'm on the archives. I'm on Oak Bay Receptions. I'm on the McPherson and a few others. Anyhow, a few. And I enjoy all of them. So thank you very much. And thanks for everybody for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Ney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome everybody. I'm Tara Ney, and four-term councillor, should I say. And I sit on the South, my primary commitment on committees is the South Island Prosperity Project. And I've sat on many, many other projects in the past, but this is my main one right now. So look forward to the evening with you all.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and pleased to be here, and I'm thrilled that we're having the town hall and have a chance to hear questions directly from Oak Bay citizens. My second term on council, and my goodness, I can't believe how many meetings we've had over during the pandemic. It's been absolutely a crazy time. The committees that I serve on, for Oak Bay, I'm the liaison for the emergency program. And for the CRD, I'm the water commissioner, making sure that of course, the water that comes out of the taps is as clean as possible and as tasty as possible. And I'm also an alternate for a number of other committees and commissions. And I'm hoping, Kevin, that you'll point out at some point the minutes of the last virtual town hall maybe before we get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome everybody. It's wonderful to have you engaged with us tonight, even though it's on Zoom. I think we've all struggled with the fact that citizen engagement has really been diminished during the pandemic, but we look forward to, as the Mayor has pointed out, to hopefully returning to opportunities to engage with you in a more personal way, face-to-face. My name is Corinne Green, councillor, as the Mayor pointed out. This is my second term on Oak Bay Council. I was first on council between 2011 and 2014. I then, previous to that, when we lived on the Saanich Peninsula, I served 2 terms with the North Saanich Council. So it is my privilege to serve this community again this term. And I am your council liaison for the local Business Improvement Association, representing small business on Oak Bay Avenue. I'm your liaison for the Oak Bay Tourism Committee, along with Councillor Braithwaite, and I both represent Oak Bay on those committees. I also represent Oak Bay on the CRD Arts Committee. I'm the representative for the Greater Victoria Labour Relations Association. And more recently, I was appointed to what's called the Timmok Treaty Advisory Committee, which is a committee formed through the cooperation of the province, the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, and now Oak Bay has recently joined. And so that is some new work to support our greater initiative on Indigenous truth and reconciliation. So again, thank you for being here. It's great to see you, even though it's through a screen.
It is great. And since Councillor Appleton's not here, I'll just introduce him. It's his first term on council, and he is a liaison to the Greater Victoria Public Library. He sits on that board and is liaison to Heritage as well, both the foundation and the commission. And so while I probably am missing something, I wanted to just make sure I had the chance to point out those 2 pieces. So he is planning on joining us. He just texted me. He's just running around a bit and just having a bit of technical issues. So we'll have him in here in just a minute. We have so far had a much smaller crowd than we had last time on this forum. So perhaps I might just go to, excuse me, some of the questions. And I think I see that most of the people who have written in ahead of time with their questions. So I don't mind going there if people wish. But if anybody that's on the call right now wishes to raise their hand and address council, please do so at this point. Otherwise, I'm happy to read some of the emails that were sent and try and answer some of those questions. It's always hard to be the first. I'm gonna pick on someone since I see Jennifer McLeod on my screen here, and she wrote an email to us, which was just being interested in hearing more about the Sichalnath Willows project and how the public might be involved in that. And so there's Jennifer. Hello. I'll try and answer your question is from the email, and then if you have any follow-ups, I'll just try and fill them in a little bit. The reality is this is pretty early days for us. We made the project as open as possible to make sure that we weren't sort of trying to shoehorn the Songhees into a process that was not in alignment with their practices. So it's very early days, and what we're just trying to do is really understand what's important to them about the park and beach area. And before we get to any sort of planning stage, which of course would have lots of public input, we're trying to just understand from them what is critical to them, what's important is, in terms of their cultural recognition, language pieces, obviously protection of any of their burial pieces and those things, but we don't really know. And so we thought we'd jointly develop a planning process with them and then use that to then go out and start our actual more formal planning for the future of that area. Now that may and probably will likely include some public engagement. Certainly, I know that area borders on two, highly, there's a lot of public engagement and involvement on both Uplands Park, where there's a lot of stewardship of that park, which of course incorporates a lot of the camas fields that were harvested for thousands of years, and Bowker Creek, which of course also is going through a restoration period and has a lot of interest to the First Nations, but also impacts both the ecology and the even just the form of the beach that it runs into. So I don't have a direct answer in terms of what the public input will be on it yet. We're still early days at this point to figure out what exactly our process will be. Is there anything else I could clarify for you?
No, that's great. It really struck me, and I was very curious. So I'll just keep, checking in and seeing what's going on.
Great, thank you. I think it's a really, there isn't a lot of overlap on the day-to-day interests of the Songhees and Oak Bays, and so we're trying to find any mechanism that we can to build that relationship. And we have an obligation, council to council, to build those relationships and strengthen them. And so this is just one piece, right? It's a step in that process, and hopefully a very productive one over time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Appleton. I introduced you on your behalf. Hope that's okay. Gave a little background on how long you've been on council and some of the committees that you serve on. So up next, if there's anybody else wish to ask, it's really an open forum. Anybody who wishes to ask any question is welcome to do so. If you just hit the raise hand within Zoom or *9 within the Zoom, if you're calling into the phone number, we will take those questions. Or if you just have a comment you wish to make, happy to take those as well. No, a lot of hands popping straight up, so I'm going to go to the next written email that I had. Oh, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just watching the chat, and I know there's a question on the chat about an update regarding Bowker Creek. It was on the news tonight, so right. Perhaps that's something you just want to touch on. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I'll deal with that right now. I don't have a lot of details on it. I went by. There's been a slough of that wall that's come down. This is near our parking lot at the rec center. In fact, we didn't do some work on that, repaving work on that, because we wanted to do some geotechnical assessment of it before we did. And so I guess that was probably wise given what's happened there. So crews are on scene, public works are on scene to make sure that there's minimal damage to the creek and to make sure that the bolsters are up and being reinforced. But other than that, I don't have any more update than that, unfortunately, at this point. You'll probably get more from the news than you will from me at this point. So there we go. So the other question we had was from someone named Jean Newton, who was just, I'll read about what she said. She said, I'm relatively new to Oak Bay, and only in the past month I've begun to get involved with municipal concerns. Can you answer questions about the proposed developments at the church site on Granite and the four-story apartment on Oak Bay Avenue? Wondering why those proposals were turned down. I probably communicated about these, so if you have more pressing matters, you don't have to talk about it. So I'll just really quickly, again, don't want to talk a lot about specific applications, certainly ones that are active. The Oak Bay United Church actually was not brought to council. It came to council early to share their broad intentions and has, an agreement in principle that was good to see that land develop, but for any number of reasons, including funding issues and so forth, that project did not go forward. So we never actually had a chance to see it or comment on it in any way, shape, or form. And the other one was the recent one on Oak Bay Avenue. And again, hesitant to comment too specifically. There's another question on it as well. But that is the process that goes through when these applications come. They go through our staff and our advisory committees and come to council. We've tweaked our procedures bylaw quite a lot to make sure that process can happen reasonably quickly, and council can look at it. And if there's a majority of council feels it has enough merit to go to public hearing, then we seek public input. But the idea there is it goes to public input if there's merit, but we don't if the majority of council doesn't feel it has enough to go forward. And then there's also a question follow on to the planning for Turkey Head, and I'd like to see redevelopment involve consultation with Indigenous community. New construction will hopefully have an Indigenous focus, including Indigenous art, restaurants serving regional Indigenous food, and environmental perspective on use of our land, water, and other resources. Boy, we have a lot of topics I can't talk a lot about in detail tonight, but that one is still actively in negotiations, although we hope to have it a final piece soon. The RFP process was a portion of that was concluded with multiple tenders some time ago. And of course, First Nations benefits and recognition was included as one of the aspects to be included. We are still in negotiations with the Oak Bay Marine Group. So I guess all I can really say is if the negotiations are successful, if we can get to a resolution, there will be, included with that would have to be some substantial value to First Nations as part of that. So that's about all I can really talk to on that one. And there was a question back here on, the Pauker Creek. So if there's a discussion that wants to happen, I'd encourage you to just, you can raise them here in the meeting, and the chat is available, but it's going to end up with a lot of side discussions between residents as opposed to trying to get the what's going on with the municipality. Is there anybody else who wishes to raise their hand at this point and ask any questions? Well, I think we have to advertise this a bit more widely, or perhaps people got so much information out of the minutes. As Councillor Zelka, you pointed out, we have a lot of information there. So before I go to the next email, though, I'm going to come back to this table. I see Ian Robertson has raised his hand. Welcome, Mr. Robertson. Oh, for some reason we can't hear you. Are you able to? Yeah, you're unmuting effectively, but it's still not coming through. Perhaps there's a little glitch. You actually, I see two instances of Ian Robertson here. So perhaps there's a second instance that's it's causing some grief. Here, I'm going to just try one thing. Mr. Robertson, I'm just going to mute you and unmute you again and see if, or you can unmute yourself again and see if that fixes the issue. That did not fix the issue. Ms. Robertson, obviously you can hear us, so there's probably a little bit of a glitch somewhere on that. Sometimes there's a mute button on the keyboard that turns off your microphone. That might be an issue. But you may just want to have to log out and log in again. We've had certainly a few instances, I've been on calls of late, where there's just a little hiccup where there's no audio heard at the other end. So I have a feeling that this is the case here. So perhaps you might want to log out and then just log back in again, and we should be able to hopefully be able to fix the problem. Okay. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Robertson, I still can't hear you. So I'm going to go to one of the emails. Oh, Mr. Robertson, can you speak now? I think maybe there was a little signal that came up there. It might be working. Never in my life did I think I would spend so much of my life having these conversations about you're muted. Have you tried this? Have you unplugged it in? So I know there was an email here from Mr. Wilmot as well, who indicated he also sent an email saying he was going to join and have a verbal question. So maybe I'll answer his written question when he comes back in, because it's a fairly short piece of that. So now I have an email here from Morris. I see, Morris, you're on the line here. Do you want to ask your questions directly, or do you want me just to read them out from? If you don't raise your hand, I'll just read them and try and answer them in order from your email. Oh, there's Mr. Robertson.
Can you hear me?
We can. It came in very loud.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions. The first is a fairly global finance question. And I am under the impression that there's somewhere between 100 and 200 million worth of infrastructure that is needed over a period of time. And there's been a report to council on that. I do not know if or how council is prepared to proceed with that, or if any funding arrangements have been made. The second part of that question is a more mundane today question, and that's that some people say that Oak Bay finances are going to have to go up by 12% to meet any of the infrastructures that are really needed. So I'd like your comments or the council's comments on those two issues. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Robertson. So the actual maybe I'm just going to I'm going to mute you again just because there's a bit of feedback. And thank you, Mr. Robertson. And I'll do my best to answer your questions on this. So there is a substantial infrastructure deficit. Depends on how you're looking at it. If we look at at the total, we started this term with just under $1 billion in infrastructure deficit. So that's sort of the entire cost of replacing all the out-of-date infrastructure over the 100 years. We were underfunding to that amount. We're down to about a $430 million, $460 million deficit. We're refining that every year as we go through some more detailed analysis. So what we've done over these 4 years is really one, just start putting a lot of money aside directly allocated towards infrastructure. So that's really eaten up half of that infrastructure deficit. We're trying to get to the point of 100% of funding. That's global funding, so it's not having all the money in the bank. But if, say, there's $100 worth of pipes and they had a 100-year lifespan, it would mean putting $1 away every year. And then over the course of that, maybe sometime borrowing and paying it back, might be sometimes saving up and then drawing down when you're replacing it. So that's essentially our current state of that. Now the second half of this is, I guess there's really three phases. One, putting money aside so we can actually make some long-term financial plans to start doing this capital work. Two is actually developing those plans. So that work is done not about probably 80% in terms of all of the infrastructure assessments and those pieces that allow us to develop our our master plan. So all of that information will feed into an ever-changing asset management master plan that will guide the actual year-to-year projects. And then we have to have a team that can actually do the work. So we're looking at scaling. We currently do between $2 and $4 million a year in capital work, and we're looking at raising that to $6 to upwards of $20 million a year in capital work, maybe even 25. So that's a huge jump. So what's coming back this month is some information about how we get from where we are to where we want to be in terms of staffing. And so there's going to be some options there for how we're going to structure that and fund it over time. And then once that's in place, then we're really off to the races doing the actual work of replacement. And the best way we can affect the affordability of this is obviously to get in front of it, both from the cost escalation over time, but also because we spend a lot of money right now on break fix, and the sooner we can get in front of replacing things that are a broken 100-year-old pipe, when you spend that money, it's essentially just sunk cost. There's no added value. So the faster we can get to the point of actually doing proactive replacement, the better off we're going to be financially. And then the question about the 12% is a little bit of a red herring. I saw that floating around as a expected 12% tax increase. What we've done right now in terms of our financial plan is correct. That's about what we need to do to attack the second half of our financial deficit. So the other $500 million, the $430 or $460 million left. But but that's going to be increased over a number of years. So we're looking at about 5 to 6 years of 2% increases on our taxes. I think it's 5 after this year. And then we have the same or 6 years of 2.5% on our water utility bills related to water and sewer to help cover those costs. So those are the two pieces that you asked about. If there's any lack of clarity there, though, I'm very happy to fill in more details. Mr. Robertson, if you want anything else. If not, you can raise your hand again if you wish to follow up. And there you are. Welcome back. Nope. You've muted again. Okay, I'm going to take that as you have the information you need. By all means, just stick your hand up again, though, if you want to have any more questions. So thank you for that. I had just see Mr. Wilmot is joined us, and there was a question that he submitted to us on the ahead of time, but also just got a late email asking if he could speak tonight. Of course, anybody can speak tonight. Since Mr. Wilmot, since you were up on my list here of emails I was reading out to answer questions, I am more than happy to take a question directly, or I can just read it out. And although it's maybe either way.
Speak to it if you would like, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Mr. Wilmot.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, councilors, and staff. In preparation for this meeting, I reread the minutes of the December 9th, 2021 Town Hall meeting. My first observation was how good the minutes were. My second was that the mayor made 8 pledges during this meeting. From the minutes, do you remember the following? The mayor noted that a fulsome report on rock blasting would be returning to council in the first quarter of 2022 to facilitate discussion of what is expected of municipalities based on federal and provincial mandates. Do you remember the following? The mayor acknowledged the impact this has had on the district's parks, this is about dogs, which have seen a significant increase in dog traffic, and shared that the district will be looking at a full review of the animal control bylaw in 2023. In the short term, they need to consider options early in 2022 to provide the temporary location of off-leash dogs.
Sorry, Mr. Wilmot, do you want me to give you updates on those as we're going? Is that what you're looking for?
I'll finish and then I'll let you go.
Okay.
I am sure that most of you do not. It is unreasonable to expect us to. How are we supposed to determine whether we've been heard or not? Only if we can see action on these items. My suggestion is that all the town hall meeting minutes be recopied and put in an easy to find place on the municipal website. Just as an aside, I bet you one person I bet you 99 people out of 100 couldn't figure out where those minutes are if they went onto the website. It's difficult to find. It's there, but it's difficult. With this recopied, under each, I would have an actionable item from the list that would read action pending and the town hall meeting date. Then, when an item is actioned, this will be replaced by actioned, the date and a reference to where one can find out how the item was actioned. This updated document would allow everyone to keep track of where we are in the process and as we await for the items to be actioned. I think at the moment, there's a disconnect that isn't helpful for council, staff, or community when people have a vague idea that the mayor has 8 items on his list, but I bet you most of them couldn't tell you where they were unless they have a particular interest in it. And it would be much better for the council to know that the mayor's made 8 pledges and that, say, after 6 months, he's actioned 4 of them and 2 of them he can give an explanation for. I think that would bridge the gap between everything's a priority and this and that, and people could see in the latest town hall meeting, 8 pledges were made and how they're going to be dealt with. I think there's a huge gap that I would ask you to take this suggestion and address. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmot, and I appreciate the commentary. So just a couple of points. One, it is a committee of the whole, so we don't make decisions here. There aren't pledges made. We don't. That's not a commitment piece. I'm trying to answer questions as best I can to provide accurate updates to people in answer to questions. So we're not setting policy here. So when I'm answering those questions, it's really just to answer the questions for people if they're curious about what's happening.
But excuse me. No. This isn't policy. This is saying the mayor noted that a fulsome report on black rock blasting will be returning to council in the first quarter of 22. I'm not saying what you're going to do there. I'm just saying this is your pledge that it would be returning. That's nothing to do with policy. That's to do with process. And I don't think that you can avoid it by saying that we're not setting policy.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be. You're muted, Mr. Wilmot. You just got muted at the very end there, Mr. Wilmot.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So I'll just finish. So I've just the term pledge was made there. That's not just for clarification. I know you're aware of the difference between the committee of the whole and council, but this is an informal gathering to answer questions and to provide some updates. And so those dates, as all dates can move, they can shift. Blasting is now expected in Q2, not Q1, for example. So we don't currently have that intention of including those within the minutes. What we do and what we have done is add in our procedures quarterly updates for the public so that issues as they've arisen, anything that's a council motion or priority or a staff project that's raised up to the level of council is reported on. So both council and the public have easy access to where things are sitting on a quarterly basis. And we use that, and the council and the public should use that to measure us against our targets. And just given the size of our staff, I think it would be very difficult to kind of keep having a number of running minutes that were constantly updated backwards. I think that's probably the best piece, because then we have a single point of reporting for anything that people are interested in one spot. So that's the current process that we go to right now, Mr. Wilmot.
But all I'm asking is that for the minutes, you put down action pending, and when you've done it, you update it. This does not take much of staff time to do. And as well, I think that even if you say the first quarter of 2022 and have to update it, it's better than people coming to a town hall meeting, seeing certain items come forward, but then those particular items in the format they're presented are not dealt with in that manner. And then they're shuffled off to some other place and to read an update. Whereas if there's one place where all the minutes are, I would ask you to consider it. I think this is a key step in getting the community involved where they can quickly see where you are. So if you don't want to answer it now, I'd ask you to discuss with your council at some point if whether some modification of this would be useful for the community. I certainly think it would be.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmot. I'm not saying that it's not doable. I'm just letting you know sort of where we're at right now and how, at a broad sense, we have tried to address that intention in our current policy and processes. That doesn't mean we can't improve it and find different ways of doing it. Absolutely. So thank you for that. I have Curtis has his hand up.
Hello.
Hello, Curtis. I see you have some Oak Bay chicken is on their last legs comment.
That's you have to read a little bit up the comments to just someone else's metaphor or analogy. Yeah, so there's been a lot of questions about development, and Morris posed the question. I know in the past, let me state what I think one of the issues is. Currently, the applicant, like the church or the Quest building were the two that were mentioned, they have to spend a fortune to get it to the planning department. I know the Oak Bay United Church were $700,000 in before they got a look from the planning department. And I think that's a big detriment for development. I know in the past, and I believe Mr. Wilmot might have been involved in this, that there was some talk of getting preliminary applications to council. I think there was something around 2015 or so, like for form and character, basically, with not geotech and service requirements and full architectural drawings, the types of things that cost an applicant a huge amount of cash. And yeah, so like, I mean, say what you want about the church, too big, not big enough, whatever, angry neighbors, greedy church, whatever you want to say, it costs them their full whack of cash. And then they had to borrow more money to get it in the door at the hall. And that's a real detriment for applicants. And I know the Quest is a different story. It's a private developer, but the church was using BC Housing money. And it just seems like the process is backwards, right? You want to have the applicant basically get a tentative yes to form and character, and then spend their big chunk of change doing the full drawings, et cetera, only to get to a no. So the church, they ran out of money basically. My understanding was it got to the hall, planning department said you need to do this, and this, and then to bring it back, and they didn't have the money to do it. The Quest is a little bit of a different story. They just do minor tweaks, come back and bring it back to council. But the point is all this money spent up front to get to a no. Whereas like form and character design, this is what it's going to look like, which is mostly what people are concerned about. Maybe you could speak to that. And I don't know if you were on council when that, I believe it involved design charrettes and that type of thing. I mean, I can dig for it, but it might take me a while.
Okay, I can answer the question. And in fact, I think what you're pointing out is exactly one of the big problems with development as a whole, and certainly affordable development is the very high costs of applications. So some of that we control, some of it we don't. Certainly there is a great deal that does have to go through. A lot of it's provincial regulations that we have to abide by to make sure that we're doing our piece on it. But a lot of it is our own assessments of pieces. And yes, things like geotech and those things are required, although not always at the upfront as part of it. Yeah, modern multifamily buildings do cost, as you say, and you cited $700,000. That is a pretty normal amount of money for people to be investing in that application process. It is quite enormous. And so that all trickles down into the cost of these buildings as well. So there's a few things here I think that are worthy of talking about. One, there is in our process now for larger applications an ask to go out with those sort of siting and design type pieces to the public and talk about what what a project is going to do and bring, and collect that feedback from the public. Specifically reaching out to neighbors, but even out to the broader public to get a sense of what the potential concerns and ideas might be for it. So that can help inform the application before they go down the path. And so that's part of our development planning process. It's not our process, but we encourage developers to do that and allow us to attend and capture some of those comments, so that helps inform our decision making as it comes down the pipe as well. And the other is that we have an obligation, I think, to make our rules for what can and can't be built as simple and as straightforward as possible. And I think this council, from the very beginning has said, we absolutely have to address what we can within this framework. And a lot of this is what we're doing right now. I mean, the suites is a sort of a small part, but the infill housing piece of getting those regulation in so everybody knows what can and can't be built that's the difference between someone looking at an application for a townhouse and having to wait 3 years for a complete rezoning, or a month or two if it's compliant with the bylaws and guidelines that we expect people to meet. So that's what we're doing this year, and next term the plan is, although ultimately up to the next council, to tackle the village plan and the corridors, and that would be looking more at the multifamily areas. And again, what that looks like exactly, I don't know, but there's some fantastic models out there with them sliding scale. So I'll give an example. In Victoria, they have a model, and Burnaby and a few others have used this to great effect, which is basically, if you want to build, X, which is, completely compliant with everything, it's a pre-approval. And then if you want to build, up to say, 20% more, as long as it has affordable housing components or other community benefit, it gets approved based on that sliding scale of approvals. And then if you want more than that, then it's a rezoning process, and it goes through the much more fulsome process, which is more expensive, but allows for unique sites or unique situations to be dealt with on a one-off basis. But the more we can move away from the one-offs, the better off we are. The more clarity we can give to guidelines, the better off we are. And both from a cost perspective, but also I think a community acceptance. If we've laid out the rules early and clearly for everybody with community buy-in, then those applications have a lot more credibility when they come forward to council. So those are sort of the pieces for it. And you're absolutely right. The cost of these, it's almost impossible for an amateur to develop anymore because of the huge upfront costs that come along with this. It's just not a simple process. I'll go to Councillor Green. You wanted to add something?
Sorry, this unmuting process is frustrating. My apologies. I just wanted to add that one of the improvements that OPE has made and implemented late last year is the new development tracker website tool. And this allows the community to visit the website and track any developments that are moving through the planning system. And this is a huge improvement, and I think it is long overdue. So first of all, yes, it's very difficult. Planning is not easy. Applications can take a long time, but that isn't always because of the municipality. That could be the planning cycle for the developer, and he or she may choose a planning cycle that is much longer. I think it's also fair to say that Oak Bay has really started to examine this carefully and remember that the municipality did not have a qualified planner on staff until 2015, and that's a huge factor. So we are catching up on processes and trying to improve the way we plan and the way we deal with applications. But I think there are some improvements, and I think there are some really good opportunities coming forward with some new staff and with perhaps a new vision for planning that focuses on the community and service. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Green. I think sometimes we struggle with a couple of things. One is right now we're sort of running on about a 50% capacity in our building and planning department, which doesn't help the day-to-day treatment of building permits and things as well. And it does impact some of our larger planning issues as we're going forward. Curtis, is there anything else you wanted to follow up on that?
Not really. I was kind of hoping that the zoning stuff would get done this term. But then I remind myself of the glacial pace of municipal and politics sometimes. And the pandemic, I'm sure, didn't help, but I don't think we can fully use that as an excuse. And the development tracker, it's good. It's nice to be able to get all that information quickly. but most of the time when I go and look, it's full of demolition permits for single family houses. And we don't have a mandated materials reclamation. You know, like I know I live in a 1930s house, and the materials that it's built with, it would cost you double, triple what you pay for lumber now, because it's such a good quality of material. And it's a bit depressing to see all that. You know, you go by, oh, there's the bulldozer. Oh, and 6 hours later, the house is in a dumpster, right? And you can just see the old growth fir and all the hardwood floors, et cetera, in the bin going off to the landfill. Yeah, but I'll stop talking and let people get on to other things. Oh, and the other thing too is there's the side chat. There was a discussion about a larger tax base helping with the infrastructure, so more households, more taxes. And I think I pointed those to Councillor Appleton a while back. To replace infrastructure, you just need money. It just has to come from somewhere, right? So a larger tax base, yes, or more taxes. And my comment in the post is we get a great deal on property taxes here compared to the rest of Canada. I don't think people realize in Ontario, I'd probably be paying an extra like $2,000 more for my property tax for like Mississauga, Toronto. So yeah, nobody likes to pay more tax, but sometimes you have to. Thanks.
Thanks, Curtis. I would, I think it's worth pointing out on that one. I guess our goal here is to make sure that we're running our municipality efficiently and effectively, and keeping those one of the reasons for the asset management piece is that that's the only way we're going to keep our costs down over the lifespan of this municipality, and that's our obligation. And so obviously, if you can split those costs up amongst more people, that's cheaper. But either way, we have to run ourselves effectively and do that work. So it's a shared piece there.
Sorry, just want to add one last thing. I think,
Go ahead, Curtis.
We have to acknowledge the current council is doing better than previous councils, because the writing was on the wall 20, 30 years ago and not much was done. And I do believe it was to keep taxes low. So, we're looking in the mirror right now. And one of those things is money has to come from somewhere, whether it's a bigger tax base or more taxes. Thanks again.
Thank you, Curtis. I have a couple other hands popping up here. So we're on this sort of theme of housing pieces, and there was another email from Morris who's online here as well. So I'll try and take the questions that he wrote and answer them, and then Morris, I apologize, I don't know your last name, so I can't call you more respectfully by your last name. So I'll just go with that. But perhaps if you do want to speak to us, you can just share your name with us as well. So if you're okay with it, I'll go through your email. If you wish to do it yourself, you're more than welcome to. Just raise your hand if you wish to speak, and then I'll get to Ms. Williams after this. So question number it's a series of questions. So why is the secondary suite legislation 2 years behind? It was due for completion last year or this year. It's probably 8 months behind schedule of where we'd like to be, but it is scheduled to be completed this term, which was our commitment in this. Why is the infill legislation behind schedule? That's a combination of staffing and the pandemic. But we are on track for actually having our guidelines in place this year. So what's going to get pushed back a little bit of the actual any sort of bylaws and regulations implementation piece of that. Councillor Braithwaite, you wanted to add something?
It looks like in the chat, Morris is saying that it says individuals can't unmute. So he's looking to have somebody address that, because I think he would like to speak, it looks like.
Okay, so I just look for a hand to be raised if you wish to speak, and you should be able to unmute. There's an unmute button that should work, but all I can do is
in also don't have an unmute button, but the *6 for those calling in.
Yeah, but if they hit *9, I can call on them and I can help them unmute. So if anybody's listening in, absolutely, through their phones, you can hit *9 again, *9 to raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. So, Mr. Morris, I can only ask you to unmute in the application. I can't unmute you, I don't believe. So there is a On the bottom left, if you're on a computer, you should have a mute button that should allow you to unmute.
I think he left. He must be trying to log back in again.
Yeah. So why don't we just go? I won't answer his questions if he's not here. So why don't I'll go. The other hand that's up right now is Ms. Williams. And I saw a question in the chat there. Is that what this is? Why don't you feel free to just ask the question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to just bring your attention to
Selena
the chat.
Williams?
Did you want me to read that out for you? Oh, it's not taking it through here.
I think, do you want me to ask the question? Because I can see it in the chat and apparently I can unmute.
Oh, no, she's unmuted now.
Oh,
go ahead.
good, okay.
Am I unmuted?
You are. You're
able to
unmuted.
hear me?
I can hear you, Ms. Williams. Yes.
I was trying to use a mic in chambers so that we didn't get an echo, but certainly if Councillor Braithwaite could read that out, it might be a better listening experience.
I think it would. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the question is, as the parents of 2 active preschool-aged children, we spend a lot of time in parks and playgrounds around the CRD. While other municipalities have some excellent playgrounds, the facilities in Oak Bay leave something to be desired. Have grown up here in the late 80s, many of these playgrounds are almost exactly the same now as they were back then. What is Council's plan for the modernization and upgrade of Oak Bay's playgrounds? Jessica Prince and Brian Wall.
Oh, there we go. A question by proxy. So absolutely correct. Our playgrounds are quite tired and certainly need some work in terms of bringing them up to speed, both for an accessibility and for a modernization standpoint. So in our capital plan, they're starting to be replaced next year. So right now they're sort of in the phase of every year for the most part. We don't have the exact plan yet, but they are now in our 5-year capital plan, and we've made quite a significant move to make sure that we're putting our planning includes all of our capital plans over time. So that's that's where it's sitting, and so you should be seeing those replaced. Over the coming, certainly 10 years, you'll start seeing most of those being replaced. Some of them, depending on where they are, may take a bit more time and complexity. I'm thinking of Sitchalnuth or Willows because it's sitting on a very, an area that has a lot of First Nations importance and potentially archaeological issues in case we dig down. So there's some aspects there that might impact it. But that's the current schedule in our capital plan at this point. We were also just about to appoint a Parks, Rec and Culture committee to replace the old commission, and some of those questions will also be going to them to help give us some guidance in terms of prioritization of some of those facilities. Curtis, your hand is still up. I'm going to lower it, and if you wish to speak again, I'm just going to ask you or maybe I can't, to raise it again, so I don't get confused with the.
I'm good.
Okay, can you lower the hand because it keeps popping up to the top of my screen, which makes it a little hard to see other people who are on those pieces. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So is Mr. Morris back again? Or maybe we should just call him Mr. Morris. That may be simpler. So I won't answer the question until he comes back. But just before I go on to the other, there's really no other questions. Just one very, very simple one, which sent us a series of memes and asked us which we thought was the most funny, which are all related to Oak Bay not approving housing. So I know a bit of tongue in cheek, but I think if I had to go with one, none of them were super funny, but I would go with the Uno. The Uno card seems to be the most original of those bunch. So there we go to answer that question. We have a number of other people here in the thing, so I'll go to them. But before I do that, I'm going to go to Councillor Patterson. And then actually, I think since we're at 7 o'clock, I might just invite all the members of council. If there's anything you think that have been missed or some points you would like to raise for some potential conversation, we can do that as well. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just, I don't want to take any time away from those who are joining us and would like to speak, but I thought there have been questions about representation at the CHRD about that. I thought that you could perhaps speak on that. And I noticed too that there was a commentary about the sidewalks, and you have spoken about the Oak Bay Avenue specifically, but I thought perhaps you might want to say a few words about the pedestrian survey that closed on March the 7th, because people might not be familiar with that. And then the other piece that I noticed was there was a question about our community gardens. And I don't know the history of Oak Bay Community Gardens, so perhaps that's something you also would like to give a little bit of a background and update on. So just things that I've noticed and we might want to speak about. Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to circle back to those if we have time there. Great. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to share some just some of the difficulties here at Council. I have, with respect to housing, I can't, of course, and won't speak to any particular development proposal that's either before Council or may come before Council. But I did want to say that this is a wonderful opportunity with the recent census that has come out, and also looking at some of our other municipalities and some of their experiences around housing. I know that there's a general belief out there that if we just build more, somehow that would magically reduce the cost of housing. Toronto just went through a huge boom, and with the census data that just came out, I wanted to share a very, very brief quotation from Douglas Porter, Chief Economist of the Bank of Montreal. And as part of his analysis of the data that came out of Toronto, the fact that the number of dwellings has risen strongly in Toronto and even faster than the overall population in both the past 5 and 10 years, this is within the city of Toronto, suggests that a big supply response is not going to magically solve the issue all by itself in terms of reducing the cost of housing, says Douglas Porter, Chief Economist of Bank of Montreal. Policy makers will also need to address the demand side. The piece that came out as part of the demographer's analysis of the census data, this is about a month ago in the Globe and Mail, suggests that the 2016 census showed that one-person households were, for the first time ever, the most common type of household in Canada, surpassing couples with children for the first time. These are some of the sort of demographic changes that we're having to struggle with. And as a way of addressing at least the demand side, I know that my council colleagues and I support restricting, at least for the multi unit housing that comes forward, restricting it so that Airbnb and those short-term rentals cannot use the space that would be used for longer-term housing in particular. That's as one way that we're trying to address the demand side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will point out that we were one of the first municipalities in the region to do the housing needs report, to try and actually tailor our housing forms to the needs. Now that's a bit of an imprecise science, and certainly as a council, we've been moving forward with additional housing forms through the infill piece. So I'm not here to reflect any individual points of view, just sort of the direction of council on this piece at this point. I was just having a quick glance here at the Parks and Playground Replacement Program in our capital plan. So just to give some idea, 2022 is pretty much in alignment with where we've typically spent, which is at 89,000. It's typically given in the 80 to 90,000 range. 2023 is 150,000. 2024 200. 2025 is 327,000. 2026 is 300,000. So there's quite a bit of investment going into those parks in the capital plan over the next 5 years as well. So just a little bit of helpful information there to the princes who were asking that question. Thank you for that. Is there any other members of council who wish to speak here before I go back to the members of the public?
I'll just quickly jump in, Kevin, that it was great that you brought up the Parks, Rec and Culture Committee, or the Parks and Rec Committee, that we will be starting up again, because it would be wonderful to get some people interested in that committee, because we will need probably 6 or 7 members to be on that committee. And also to remind people that are on the call, because they have such great questions and they have such good opinions, that this is an election year. So, and I know that not all of us will be running again for a re-election. So there will be spaces available around the council table. And I think that it would be wonderful to get some people who have good opinions and are as articulate as some of the people that we've heard around the table tonight. So to consider running, just my little plug for the election for them.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Any other comments before I go to the back to the public? I don't see any, so thank you. Morris, or Mr. Morris, perhaps you could introduce yourself, and if you want to ask your questions, you feel free to do so. You are unmuted at this point. We should be able to hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate everyone that's taken the time to address my emails and for holding this meeting tonight. It's great to actually put a name to the face.
Yeah.
My biggest concern was going forward for Oak Bay. I know at the beginning of this year, a lot of students were out protesting on the street trying to plead for housing. Some counselors, like Mr. Eric there, said they would be moving forward on the secondary suites legislation, which is great. All the policy is great. I'm excited to see it completed by the end of the current term. But I am a little bit dismayed that we're not seeing any help at the moment. And the Oak Bay Housing Needs Report was done some time ago and found that many in the community are paying more than they can afford or are underhoused. And with seniors on a fixed income, students on a budget, it can be really difficult in Victoria. So I was just wondering what we're going to see going forward for Oak Bay, trying to address some of the housing needs.
Sure, thank you. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'm happy to sort of resolve it again. So you're right, UVic is a big part, and so is Camosun College, and an impact on our housing needs. I will say we are in a very positive spot with both UVic and the province right now on that front. They are being much more innovative in terms of their ability, looking at options for developing housing. Obviously, there's a new housing going in there right now, multi-student housing. But they're also opening up ideas for funding that, because they've traditionally been unable to raise capital to do those kind of buildings. So the province is making that a bit more flexible for them, and they're looking at some more innovative ways. Certainly, I think we would like to see them on the Oak Bay side, on the Cedar Hill Crossroads side, look at some possibilities there. But at the end of the day, it's their property as to what they want to do. But they are not in opposition at this point, which is great. And just for a little history there, that land was all scheduled to have hundreds of housing units on it back in the 60s, before it got purchased by a UVic that stopped all of that development from happening. In terms of suites, you're right. We're trying to complete that this year, so that clarity is provided. I would just observe that no matter what people's expectations are on suites, my observation is it's probably not going to change dramatically. Most people who want suites to often have them now because it's a soft enforcement model. But it does allow for a bit more purpose-built as new buildings are going in and pieces to make sure that those are going into code and in a safer environment. But I think people who are expecting dramatic increases or decreases of suites with any change are probably, that hasn't been the case in most jurisdictions for the most part. So it will achieve certainly a housing form that meets a need, but I think we're going to have the absolute maximum impact with the infill. Our whole community has multiple options, and when you're talking about housing needs, what you touched on, the seniors and people being mishoused, and that's one of the biggest issues we have. We don't have the right housing for the right people at the right times in their life right now. So if your children have left home and there's two of you in a big house and you want to move into something smaller in your neighborhood, there's no options. It's all single family, or you move to a corridor downtown to get multifamily. And that's those options for low maintenance, to be able to retire and travel. Those pieces are just not available right now. And that's what we're looking to look at is some of those housing forms that allow people to move and migrate and be in the right housing form at the right stage of their life and in a way that is reasonably affordable. And I don't think we'll ever see truly affordable market in Oak Bay. I think it's a bit too desirable for that to happen, but we can certainly contribute and make housing available for people and make it more affordable by reducing the time to development and the clarity of development in that process. So those are the big pieces. The multifamily is next term, but probably has less impact in some ways. And again, just the reality of our situation as well. There's some older multifamily units or buildings that might come down. Most of them are still quite functioning and operable, and are probably not looking for a complete redevelopment in the near term. So we're probably not going to see really significant changes in the existing multifamily sites. It depends, I guess, a little bit on what we come up with as a piece. But I think something that the next council is going to have to deal with is, I think people forget this a lot, is Oak Bay provides a lot of reasonably affordable market housing because everything's been amortized and it's older wooden buildings. So a lot of those apartments are renting for well below what is the regional market rates for, say, a single 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. And so when and if we start replacing those buildings, if you have 40 or 50 units in an old wooden building and you're going to replace it with, say, 50 or 60 new units, they're not going to be affordable. And so what do you do with those people who are going to be displaced by that, and how do we accommodate that within any changes? So those are going to be very, very difficult questions to answer as we go through those multi-unit housing replacement models. And Morris, I don't know what I should call you. Is it just Morris, or is there a more formal name I should address you by? Nope, you're still muted. Do you want me to do
No, Morris is great. Thank you.
Did you want me to go through your other questions that you had submitted, or is that sufficient for?
No, lots have been addressed. I do hope we see more changes to the zoning process. As Curtis mentioned, it takes, as Curtis mentioned, it takes an extremely long time. And I think that's why we've only seen 4 development applications in about as many years. So speeding up the process, having some certainty for people wanting to turn their single family home into a townhome or an apartment would be awesome. Is there any ideas to commit to by right zoning at all, or automatic rezoning of a single family home to turn into a duplex?
So at this point, we're still in the process of collecting those options and bringing them back. So it is possible. We're certainly looking at ways of making sure that if the criteria are very, very clear, so there doesn't have to be any kind of spot rezoning done to achieve that. So at this point, we haven't contemplated making an as of right. So all single family being zoned as duplexes, for example, which is being done in some jurisdictions in the world. That's not something we've been looking at, but certainly looking at, I guess, equivalencies of if as we develop what kind of housing we want and what those criteria are, that those are built into the regulations and guidelines so that it's much clearer about what can be built.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did I see another question popping up here? My apologies if I've missed something. I'm going to go back to just Councillor Patterson. You raised a couple of pieces that I wouldn't mind touching on. So I'm sure there is a fair bit of interest in the Oak Bay Lodge. So last month, February, there was a report that came back to the hospital. Actually, not the hospital. It was the hospital district. So, which is the owner of the land. So what's happened is that there was 2 rounds of consultation that informed some of the options that would be considered. Island Health has taken that, which is quite broad, and looked at what their capital and their operating funding is looking like. So at this point, they don't really know. And so what's going forward is a sort of a 2-track process. One is that we're seeking answers on what services they can fund operationally, and then also what capital they have available to build. And those 2 will inform what comes forward. What it does look like, though, and I think this is very positive, it's very reflective. What they're looking at is very reflective of what we heard as the priorities of the community. So really as a seniors hub, so they're looking at everything from some transitory wound care to dementia day care to hospice services, supportive housing, those kind of pieces that would make a collection of services related to seniors care. So that's the intention. Now, of course, it's just dependent upon do they have enough funding to do that, because some of those services would be moving from other places, but some of them would be net new. And ultimately, of course, the services you want to put on site impact the form and design of the building. And so we're not sure yet if there's enough there to use up the land, or if they might want to start looking at subdividing the land and using some of it more for housing as well as just the medical services piece. So at this point, they're moving it forward. If they can't get a firm answer out of Island Health, then they'll probably come forward at some point with a rezoning application on spec, just to sort of say, we'd like to have these services on there, and this would be sort of the setbacks and height that we would want to allow them to move forward when they have it. So we'd have to consider that if they did that. Ideally, of course, we would want to see them come forward with a proper suite of services and build that to the needs for the community, because it's going to be there for a very long time. The other piece of this is there is a pedestrian survey, which is guiding into a pedestrian master plan. That feedback is being consolidated right now. So what's going to come back is a report back to council that summarizes that and provides some options for direction from council. So I don't have an exact timeline for that, but certainly in the next few months, we should have that come back. And the community gardens, I don't have much to add. We have a very limited number of community gardens. I know Councillor Ney has had looked at ways of expanding that at various times in the past. We've looked up in the northern part of the community. We've looked at some potentials of other garden spaces and parks to possibly adapt them. There's a lot of value in those community parks. Obviously, we have a lot of people with gardens in the single family homes, but in areas particularly around multifamily and places that people want to have gardens, it's nice to be able to provide. They provide both very healthy food, but also really community building places, right, for people to get together and build friendships and those pieces. So there's no plans right now for additional ones, but there is also a park master plan coming out in the next few years that should also probably help. That'll be one of those things, I'm sure, on that list of things that we might want to address. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, if you don't mind, if we go back to the Oak Bay Lodge site for a minute. And one of the things that a number of residents have talked to me about, and I know the Hampshire Hill Neighborhood Association also made a presentation at the last meeting on March the 9th of the CRD Hospital Board meeting. They're very concerned about the need for a primary healthcare unit in Oak Bay. We do not have a primary healthcare unit. And with so many individuals now seeking doctors, because there is a great shortage, people are losing doctors to retirement, or doctors are choosing to leave practice and go into the hospital setting. I hope that this council feels comfortable advocating for something like that, a primary healthcare unit. And I know that a lot of residents would love to see that on the site. So I'm hoping that's part of the mix when you refer to medical services. And how can we perhaps play a role in that advocacy, I guess? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Green. And yes, you're right. That is one of the services that they're trying to include in there, is whether an urgent primary care center or something equivalent to that as a model. As you probably are aware, they're struggling with those models right now in terms of how they're working. They're struggling to attract and keep doctors within those pieces. So it is absolutely part of the mix. We're very clear on that, and I've been advocating, and I really appreciate the work of our MLA Murray Rankin as well, who's also been very strong at advocating for having some of that, because we have very limited primary care physician services within our community, almost none. So, are there any other questions here? I don't see other hands popping up. And I think I have addressed most of the questions that have come in through the email. I think we have to do a better job of getting all of us get on social media and promote these things when they come forward, because we had such a good turnout last time, and well, these are excellent questions and points. There's still only about a quarter of the number of people here today as there have been in the previous one. So
it's probably because there's a men's soccer game on tonight. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Costa Rica. There we go. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. One of the questions that was asked of me that I think might be suitable for bringing to this forum, because I really couldn't answer it, was with respect to the public engagement that was done around secondary suites and especially around infill. The question came up was, is the uplands going to be included in that initiative? And are there any particular zonings within Oak Bay that either will or will not be included? So those are just some general questions I wasn't quite sure how to answer that maybe you could help surface the answer. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Zelka. And at this point, I don't believe any of those are, there's no restrictions in terms of what could or could not be included in that. At the moment, we're looking across the entire single family nature of the community. Uplands has its own quirks, like obviously with the Oak Bay Special Powers Act and those sort of pieces attached to that. But I think we deal with those things when they come back and we start looking at it, because there may be some unique forms of infill that might be very suitable for the uplands that might not be suitable in other parts of the community, for example. So I think we just have to look at that with an open mind when that information comes back, but it's certainly not excluded from that discussion. Morris, you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. In talking about uplands, I was reminded of a recent discussion. The Oak Bay Powers Act, is that the only legislation on uplands housing, or do they have covenants as well? Sorry.
No, there's no covenants. Well, there might be covenants on individual houses, but there's no broad covenant on the land in the uplands. Uplands, the Special Powers Act is a strange thing, because it was essentially a semi-private development where the residents had control over the setting and design of houses. Mm-hmm. And when that organization closed up, that power is part of their agreement of when they closed that down, they gifted their back taxes, became Uplands Park. They donated that land. And the special powers was, I guess they knew someone in power at the province, because the province drafted a special legislation that delegated that siting and design control to the municipality. So it's a very rare.
Very nicely. What I had read on it had said that they basically only paid the taxes on the roads, and then kind of blackmailed Oak Bay, if you want the roads, then you'll have to allow us to forgive the taxes on the houses we owed. But yeah, we could say gifted.
Well, it was definitely in payment for back taxes, the Uplands Park portion. But the organization, as I understood it at the time, was essentially going bankrupt. So it was really just the residents left there. I don't know all the history too more specific than that. So if you have more, I'd love to sit down over coffee and learn about it sometime. So was there anything else, Councillor Zelka? I thought I might touch on a couple of other things that people might be interested in. We're one of the topics of interest that I have seen, not related so much to council, but tangentially, is just policing and all the interest in police changes and those things over time. And I just thought I would throw a little plug in for Oak Bay Police, which is I think I would argue very, very good at what it does. And we're just going through a process of finding a new deputy chief there. But interestingly, I think the only police force in Canada, I think in North America, that has 50% of its constables and sergeants are female now. So it's a very gender balanced force. First in BC to have a patrol car that was all electric, and currently undertaking a strategic plan. So the survey is now complete. So that information is back, but you'll probably see a bit of information coming out on that as the governance and then the operational plans flow over the next little while to guide that organization. And I just also like to point out that there was a new agreement signed with Saanich Police about 2 years ago to provide the ancillary services, detective services, lab services, those things. And it's been very, very successful. So it's working really, really well. Culturally, a great fit. It's an expansion of what was being done before, but it allows Oak Bay Police to really focus on community policing, which they do very, very well. So it's a different thought. I just share that with people as well. Curtis, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering when we're going to approach the Municipal Finance Authority for the big loan we need, or if that's part of the infrastructure replacement. Like, do we have a timeline for that? Because I know the replacement's going to take 50 years or whatever, but wondering when we're going to hit them up for the cash.
Sure. Thanks, Curtis. So there's two, I would really strongly recommend people interested in this to go to our 5-year financial plan. There's a lot of very good plain language explanations of where we're at on that. Because the answer is it depends. It depends how fast we can ramp up our spending. Obviously, we're going to draw down our reserves first because that's the least expensive thing to use. But we do have a large amount of debt ceiling available to us because we have almost no debt as a municipality. So, that's going to become, it's a few years out still. I think in the most optimistic, or not optimistic, but the most aggressive ramp up of our replacements, still a few years out. So in that time frame, you'll see a number of things, including us establishing a debt policy and how that ties to our reserves and how we're going about that. But it's almost certainly going to be part of our future reality, is that we'll be borrowing money and paying the principal and interest to smooth out the cost, so that we're not having a big spike of payments right now to pay for infrastructure that's going to be there for 100 years. So we're trying to create a single annual cost index for inflation, but that'll carry us in up downs and down times. But I think not too many years from now, you'll start seeing some borrowing happening to cover infrastructure, Curtis.
Is there any way we can hit them up now when the rates are lower? I know we get a good rate from them, but according to the Bank of Canada, we're going to see 3 or 4 more interest rates hikes in this year. So is there any way we can get it sooner, sit on it, and not pay so much interest 3 or 4 years down the road?
Generally speaking, just borrowing money to put into savings accounts is not cost effective. We do get a very good rate because the MFA has a taxing authority. They basically have a guaranteed repayment. So our borrowing rates are very low compared to the industries. But it's going to be relevantly lower no matter what. And since we're looking at a few years out still, there's really no advantage to us borrowing money to pay interest on it, to sit in the savings and earn less interest on it. So we're almost certain to borrow to our needs as we need it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Anything else that people wish to raise up here? At 7:25, and we seem to have stopped the questions coming in. So I'm happy to prattle on about things that I think people might be interested in, but I don't know if there's anybody else here who has anything else they want to speak to. Go ahead, Curtis.
Patios on Oak Bay Avenue, are those going to stay? And all the stanchions and everything? That's sort of here to stay for the next foreseeable future?
That's coming back to council for that direction. So it's certainly been very popular, and I think if it's going to stay, we probably need to create some more sort of standards and parameters for it, because we just sort of said if you can put one in, we'll support you doing it for the pandemic. So I think we'll have to look at what those look like long term in terms of safety and those other pieces, but. I don't think anybody would argue that it's added vibrancy and vitality into our villages. So we'll see. But yes, I think it's certainly coming back to us for consideration.
And I guess a final question: all the previous studies, like the active transportation and the design process that I was talking about earlier, it seems like, not just in my opinion, but in other people's opinions, we study a lot, but don't act as frequently. And I'm hoping that's going to change with the pedestrian study, the law enforcement study, the surveys. And I also wish there was a way we could get more people involved. I did do the design walk, whatever that was called. It was great. It was really good. So kudos to whoever organized that. And it was led by a planner. And maybe you could talk about our senior administration issues. Not mentioning people's names, of course, because I know you can't do that, but police chief, fire chief, and CAO in like the space of 3 months, was it? 6 months?
Something like that. Sure. I mean, I can talk about it in the broadest terms. Yeah, at the end of the so our there's no crisis at that point. I think there's our CAO is leaving for family reasons, and I think we have a pretty pretty solid way forward in terms of replacement and maintaining. And the fire chief just wanted to retire, and as did the police chief. We're very, very lucky in our police to have an incredibly experienced secondary chief who was actually former chief of Oak Bay Police as well, and was formerly running the RCMP for Saskatchewan and Winnipeg and Manitoba. So an amazing amount of experience. So you never want to lose good people, but when you have good people who are finding happy places to go and to be, and then you want to celebrate that with them and backfill. So planning is still vacant, but we are hopeful that we'll have that filled very, very shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I will say though, one of the things that I know Ms. Varela is departing us, but something that's really been a hallmark of this council and of her tenure as the CAO has been a really marked change in the corporate culture within Oak Bay. And, we have now a senior leadership team that is both enthusiastic, capable, and also really keen to make all of the various departments the best they can be and to work together without silos. And it's quite remarkable to see if you're in that office. I've been most of my life in IT world, and which is always startups and energy, and the municipal hall is remarkably similar in terms of its energy and its positivity. So I would say right now our job it's become a real employer of choice because of all the work that's going on, and our job is obviously to keep it that way and to make sure that we continue to grow those aspects. So. I think it's probably the single best thing we can do as a council for the benefit of the community is to find and build and support amazing people to come work with us and do their great work and support them. And a lot of that support, I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Green, I saw your hand, is also just is funding. And so part of the reason that we've been able to attract and keep most of our staff. I appreciate the list you just gave there, but is also the fact that council has frankly funded. So we haven't just said we want to do asset management. We've put money aside for it, and that allows the work to get done. And I think that's those kind of investments in our people and in our priorities has made a really big difference. So that's my little plug for council and for staff on that front. Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then I'll go to Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Curtis, for the question. Because I have a real interest in workplace health myself and have a little bit of a background in HR, I think it's also fair to say that the pandemic has really changed the workplace across the country. And I know that because my son, who is 40 now, has been keeping me abreast of all the changes in his workplace. And it is a different world now. And I think pandemic, in part, forced people to take a look at their quality of life, forced people to take a look at where they were working, how they were living, relationships. So I think part of what you're seeing in Oak Bay is not unnatural. I think it's occurring in other places as well. But I have to say that we have a remarkable team. And they're all very dedicated, and I agree with the mayor that so many of them are very committed. But it is true that the workplace is changing and has changed as a result of the last 2 years. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Green. I'm assuming it's Mr. Watson. Your name is showing up on my screen as Harry Watson. So perhaps you could just you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and then make your comment or question. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Watson. You were unmuted there briefly and then you remuted. Do you want me to read your question I'll read your question in the chat if that's amenable. And if you, okay. So the question in the chat is, can other councillors add their perspective on the recent article quote, province considers law allowing it to intervene when cities reject affordable housing projects, unquote. Yes, this is a very hot topic in the world today. Perhaps I'll pick a first cut at it, and I'm happy to let councillors jump in on it. Minister Eby's been quite vocal. Essentially, in some senses, it was talking really about affordable housing, but it seemed to have drifted into all housing issues, that they should just override all opportunities for the municipalities to determine the housing forms and needs and approvals. It is very speculative discussion on his part right now, and I think I'm very glad to see the Union of BC Municipalities, which is the right body to be talking with him, because they have subject matter experts and research available to help guide that conversation. I know sometimes it seems like a very easy solution to a very, very complex problem, and I don't think those usually work very well. So at the end of the day, this is a problem 30 years in the making, and it's going to take all hands on deck, both provincial and federal and municipal, to look at solutions to fix it. And I don't have all the answers for that. I think we touched on some of them today in terms of making sure that we're taking official community plans and making the local area plans and the guidelines for housing forms much more clear, so that those buildings can get built. I firmly disagree with the idea that we should sidestep public hearings or public input on things. I think that this is democracy, and sometimes it's messy, but I don't think we should be afraid of having those conversations with our public about what we want and what we can do. Our job is not to, take a poll and go with the majority. It's to listen carefully to the pros and cons and to make our best judgment on those. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of the province. I'm hoping the province will work with the municipalities on it. I just don't see any sort of waving of the wand fixing the underlying issues here. We really do have to address the housing pieces. And, if you look at what was been done on that front, I sit at the CRD and the Regional Housing First program, which was a mixed group, right? So municipalities put in now $40 million, province put in $40 million, and the federal government has put in $40 million. So we've had $120 million invested. We've got over 2,000 housing units being built of all sorts, both for the hardest to hound right through to just subsidized and market housing pieces. But those are 2,000 units that just couldn't have been built without that partnership. And so, and that's been done in just 3 or 4 years. So it's a remarkable ability when we work together on it. And so I'm hoping that the finger pointing stops on both sides. I saw UBCM sort of poking back again, and I don't want to see that. I want to see us sort of saying, okay, we've got a problem. How do we all resolve our own pieces of that to make sure that we're addressing it? I'm happy to take, the question was addressed to all of council. So if anybody else wants to throw their 2 cents in there, you may as well. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and I appreciate the question. I was wondering whether somebody might raise this exact thing, and I was hopeful that somebody would. Without commenting on the nature of implementation, in my view, seeing as how I was asked, it is important for local governments to, in my view, to be reminded that the powers that are enacted through the Local Government Act are those things which are granted to local governments by the province. And while I don't necessarily advocate having those things taken away, it's a good reminder that we exist in that framework. And in a situation where the housing crisis is as desperate as it is, we, in my opinion, as a municipality, need to cast our eye very carefully on every piece of housing that comes in front of us. So I think that, in my view, it's an excellent conversation starter. It's an excellent. I'm really pleased to see the dialogue that's arising around it. I'm really glad to see people. There's research, there's information coming out around this topic. So I think it is high time that we all collectively cast ourselves very seriously on this topic and reflect on the fact that we exist in a regulatory framework which is devolved from the province. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. You're absolutely right. We are a creature of the province on those pieces. So, Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And it's true. We are a creature of the province, but I would not like to see the province become overly prescriptive of what goes on in local communities, because the local community governments are having a lot of services downloaded to them. So we do face a lot of challenges. There is, it is not really as simple as just building density into just providing units. It's about providing the correct supply to meet the marketplace. And unfortunately, the real estate market throughout North America has really been affected by globalization, and a lot of the market has been investor driven. And so we certainly hear from the people, the segment of the market that is not being serviced by an investor-driven marketplace housing. And so I think all levels of government are going to have to share in looking at this with some clarity, finding ways to leverage more of the capital monies that are flowing out of some of the big investment funds, so that there could be greater contributions to building housing that actually is geared towards the people who need the housing. And so government incentives could be done to create that, because there's not enough of that capital coming into the Canadian market. A lot of it's flowing into bigger housing projects, particularly in the US. So I think there's a lot that can be done there, but we hear so much here about the lack of affordable housing. And yet you hear at the real estate forums, both the Canadian Real Estate Forum and the Vancouver Real Estate Forum, about the trillions of dollars that are coming down the pipes that are going to be inherited. You hear about the inflow of massive capital coming into the markets that are going to fund that investor purchasing stream. And also that certainly over the last 18 months, the housing market has been really heated up because of the drive of the pandemic and the low interest rates, and so there's been so many impacts on it, and there's not one easy solution. It really is not as simple as build more and it will solve all the problems. It is finding the capital that will fund certainly rental housing, because it isn't all about ownership of housing, it's about rental housing that's provided. And so other levels of government, it's not local governments that can influence some of those tax concessions, attraction of the capital investment market that will drive that. And, you know, I hear a lot in Oak Bay about Oak Bay isn't doing enough. I do recognize, though, I've only been here just over a decade, so perhaps not as long as some other people, but it is more difficult for mature communities like Oak Bay because we don't have a huge supply of land available for this district to contribute to providing a base that other levels of government could step in and grant us more funding so that we could get to greater affordability. So it really challenging, and it's not necessarily fair when you look at a mature community and you're trying to compare it to places like Langford, where they grew land by cutting down and blasting, and centers like View Royal, where they had more land. It's a bit challenging here, and I think it's unrealistic to think we're going to achieve those same targets. We can do better, but we can't solve all of the problems in the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Patterson. Your point about the investment is well taken. I again, though, it just highlights that we're going to get nowhere if we're at odds with the province or the federal government on these things. Like, we have to recognize they have a role to play. We have a role to play. And I'll tell you, like, I meet with the mayors once a month, and we have very detailed conversations about these things. And nobody on that call is looking at ways to stop housing from being built. We're all interested in finding ways. Same with the CRD table. It's a question of how and limited pieces and regulatory things that impact us. It's all those. But as I said before, we're trying to do our part by making sure that we're providing those housing forms that are possible and making that as clear and as straightforward as possible, so that we're seeing those housing forms that we want built without the without unnecessary red tape attached to it, because that's really a huge cost driver. It really is massive. I'm going to go to Curtis and Morris in a second, but I'm going to share a quick story, just because there was a lot recently. People all know it. It was 3 small lots with a single family house on it, and the developer who bought it wanted to put townhouses, but by the time he looked at it would be 2 or 3 years to go through a spot zoning, because our guidelines aren't clear. So he's $1 million in at that time on the property. If he's doing a speculative borrowing, which is what most of them do if they're doing development, it's about 10%, borrowing costs on that. And so they're looking at, it was a little over $1 million. And so you're looking at, $100,000 in added cost every year that you're sitting there, plus the taxes, plus the loss of revenue and everything else, opportunity cost of the money. So even if they were able to build townhouses there, the cost per townhouse goes up by that much more over the course of it. And it's just not cost effective. What we can do is to shorten that time, right? It says, okay, if you've got a situation like that, corner lot, multiple lots together or a single large lot that meet these criteria, then it qualifies. And then you go through that in a short time. And that's the biggest benefit we can bring. And so the more clarity for the neighbors, for the developers, for everybody, it's always better. So that's the path that we're undertaking right now. It's not immediate, but I think in the big scheme of things, it's the most effective, because it allows us to build the housing we want under that direction in a way that actually has really substantial impacts on the costs. Before I go, Councillor Green, do you want to touch one more thing on that before on the Minister Eby thing before we go on to back to the public?
Yes, I will. I think we were asked to comment on the question. I am a strong advocate for housing, and I since moving back to Oak Bay in 2011, I strongly advocated for secondary suites, and we're almost there this year, which is great. Also involved in 2 decisions to approve rental housing. But to put the word affordable and Oak Bay in the same sentence is really difficult. And I have to tell you that when you have an average small lot of 10,000 square feet, assessed at almost $1 million, it really puts things in perspective. So I think the BC Assessment Authority is an element in all of this. And as the mayor pointed out and others have said, this is a really complex issue that cannot be solely solved at the local level. And even if we can build new housing in Oak Bay, it's going to be geared to higher income earners, unless we can find other ways of enticing developers to come and work with the municipality and possibly the CRD and the province around supported or subsidized housing projects. And further, we need rental housing in Oak Bay badly. So I guess what I'm saying is that it sounds like it's so easy. It is not easy. I think the BC Assessment Authority has a role to play. I think the province has a role to play, and the federal government has a role to play. And I think Councillor Patterson raised a really good point about investor and speculator purchases of properties and homes. Large swaths of blocks and properties are being invested by groups and corporate entities in Vancouver, for instance. And these are what are impacting the pricing. And so it's the real estate industry, it's developers, it's everybody. We all have a responsibility to address the issue. And I agree with the mayor that imposing municipal zoning on municipalities and sidestepping their ability to work with their local community, I think would be a huge mistake. I'd rather work with the provincial government that would help us work with our local communities than sidestepping what municipalities are trying to do. And just very quickly, Oak Bay does contribute every year to the CRD's supportive housing and subsidized housing projects. We make a substantial contribution yearly, and one of us sits on one of those bodies. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Green. I'm going to go to the public here again, just because it's their chance to ask questions and comment. Ms. Morris, if you wish to add anything else, I see you got a couple of comments in the chat.
Hi. Yes, this is a very hot topic. Oak Bay comes up in a lot of housing discussion because the CMHC report showed that it was falling quite behind other municipalities. And I realize that sometimes we blame that on desirability or price of Oak Bay. But if you look at it, actually, Uplands has some of the cheapest land prices per square footage. And there's also other options than just outright buying land and building new buildings. There are people that want to add additional units to their lot. We've seen other communities do garden suites. Even just turning a single family home into a duplex is something that could be done. And I see a lot about the right supply, but I would love to see social housing. Other places have done that, but we're not seeing it, and it's been decades, and we have discouraged new development, and so we don't have housing that is been happening for the last decade and now at an affordable rate. And just from a younger person perspective, seeing the rates jump by 20% for rentals in 6 months is awful. It's quite discouraging. And I know a lot of people like myself that have to move almost every year and have to pay 20, 30% more every year. Unless you commit to staying in one place, which is impossible for everyone. Living in housing situations which are less than livable. And I think this is a real problem that if the municipality has the power to do anything, they should. But if BC wants to come in and help, I think we should put up less of a fight as View Royal is putting up, and instead think of ways to collaborate and get on with it quickly, because this is badly needed. And we've seen that when vacancy rates rise, housing prices go down. And right now our vacancy rate, a healthy one would be 4%. And I believe we're sitting around under 1% right now. And I think Oak Bay has a part to play, definitely. It's close proximity to downtown. It has a lot of workers in the area that have to commute. Commuting adds environmental effects. The Langford sprawl, urban sprawl, has environmental effects devastating on the wilderness. So I think we could be doing a lot more for density and our impact on the housing crisis.
Thank you very much, Morris, for your comments. I'm going to just point out one sort of quirk of Oak Bay that people sometimes don't know. Victoria, as the grandfather municipality, owns an enormous amount of property. It still does. They actually owned a lot of property in Oak Bay, for example. They own most of the central part where there was a racetrack. They own the land that Oak Bay Lodge is currently on. They own enormous amounts. And so most of the social housing ends up getting built on public land that is owned by the public. And so one of the reasons it ends up a lot in newer municipalities where they establish a fair bit of ownership at the establishment, or in Victoria, and sometimes in Saanich, they don't have as much public land ownership either, is because of that reason, that there is those public spaces that are made available for development. So we have 2 houses that are adjacent to our village, and that's pretty much the extent of our non-park public land. And it's certainly an issue for, if you're looking at social housing, particularly. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but when it's all private land, it makes it trickier. Curtis, you have your hand up.
Actually, I forgot to lower it. I don't know. I've just been commenting in the chat. This is a huge issue, and since the feds got out of housing years and years ago, condos, not rentals. It's finally exploding now, or has for the last couple of years. And, you know, we got 30 or 40 years to get in this situation, and it's not going to be solved overnight. You know, people think I'm a mean person because I thought the church building was too big. But if I was a young person, I wouldn't move here. It's just too expensive. And I know that's sad to say because, you know, maybe your parents live here, maybe your friends and family live here, but I wouldn't move here. It's ridiculous, the costs, and other places are less expensive. And, you know, if you have the option, you don't move to Victoria. Move, and if you love the West Coast lifestyle, move to Courtenay or Comox. It's cheaper. You know, Morris is in the chat going aging parents, yeah, job, etc. All those things. Yeah, it's tough, but you know, it's not the fault of me. It's not my fault. That's just what I want to say. Where people yell at me because I put a sign up, or you know, I don't participate in social media anymore because of that. You know, because I'm a entitled NIMBY. It's not the entitled people who get blamed, you know, called out as entitled NIMBYs. No one calls out you know, investment capital firms on social media. No one calls out the government, the feds, for not putting money into social housing like they did in the past. So that's really all I got to say. Sorry.
Thanks, Curtis. You know, the housing issue is a major problem, and you know, it's not going to be a simple one to solve. But I think it's important that we have to work at it. And you know, it's at some point, if it's absurd to have a city where people can't afford to live in it to work. Like there has to be some model here where we're actually adding those things in. I mean, people are going through UVic or university and wanting to start a job and need a place to live. It's you know, as a region, we absolutely need to do that, and as a municipality within the region, we have an obligation. So, you know, I'm always thoughtful on these kind of conversations because they are thoughtful conversations, and I really, you know, I appreciate this is an interesting topic for sure. It's 7:54, and I want to give everybody on council a chance just to sort of say goodbye and thank you, and any last thoughts. So. With that, I'm just going to go around in the order I see on my screen, and that starts with Councillor Patterson, and then I'll just work quickly through the mayors before we say goodbye. If anybody else wants to get a last word, and by all means, raise your hand within the app as well. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, it's really interesting, and it's such a frustrating conversation on housing because we're talking about shelter, and that's so important to everybody. And I did live through the era of, you know, saving for many years to get my first house, and it was very, very small, modest house, Winnipeg, and then interest rates went up to 18%, and so many of my friends and the people I knew just had to hand over the keys and lost everything that they had put into it. And so I really understand the frustration, and I do think this is a problem that we all need to work on. But I certainly appreciate the comments of everyone here tonight and my fellow councillors for their thoughtful commentary. I also want to just say thank you to the Oak Bay staff who also have participated in this and organized it for us. So thank you also to them. And that's all I'm going to say now.
Thanks, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Zelka. I'm just going in the order on my screen here, so be prepared, whoever I call on.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Much appreciated. Really excellent discussion. And I failed to mention that I'm the appointed to the Regional Housing Trust Fund Commission, or on the CRD, as the Oak Bay representative. And we have, with some of the money put forward, not only by Oak Bay, but by all the constituent municipalities, have moved forward. And there are more than shovels in the ground. There are houses that are actually now being occupied with the funds that were put forward by the various municipalities, including Oak Bay. So, and I'm very, very proud of the work that committee is doing in terms of moving forward and leveraging as much of that money as possible. I'm also on the Camosun liaison. And one of the things that I'm thrilled that Camosun College is looking at as part of their strategic plan is to, on the small portion of Camosun College at Lansdowne that's in Oak Bay, they have planned, or in their strategic plans, is to actually look at putting in extensive student housing on the Oak Bay portion of the Camosun College Lansdowne. And I look forward to doing anything I can to help them move that forward as quickly as possible. And the last thing I'll share is thank goodness it took 60 years, but thank goodness University of Victoria is finally building extensive student housing. Even though we thought 60 years ago, we thought we had an agreement in place for them to build on what we refer to in Oak Bay as the promised lands, but they're finally getting that built. And I would look forward to, again, seeing anything else that can be built to assist with the two educational institutions that bless Oak Bay with their presence. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Zelka. And final comments could be anything. They don't have to be about the housing piece. We're going to wrap up the meeting here. So, Councillor Braithwaite, you're up next.
Thanks. And yeah, just on what Councillor Zelka was talking about around the student housing, I have been fortunate enough to have a tour of the, I think it's 647 bed building on UVic as the UVic liaison for council, and it's phenomenal. We're very fortunate in that the president that is now at UVic is very forward thinking and is looking at many different opportunities to bring things like that to the university. So that's wonderful. I just want to say thank you for all of the thoughtful comments. It's wonderful to be able to kind of get to know people a little bit better even though it's not in person. But I love to hear the comments and would love to continue chatting with people afterwards and continue the conversation. And again, my little plug that it is an election year. And so consider if you would like to be more involved to run for council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I will continue to follow along on the housing piece. I just want to really extend my appreciation to everybody who's contributed to this conversation on housing, and just particularly want to note folks who are raising the very real issue. This is not a theoretical construct. This is real people needing housing and being tenuously housed, dealing with the uncertainty and the stress of not being able to find a place to live. So I'm always reminded of that. I'm appreciative of the comments that pertain to that tonight, and I just I carry it with me as a counselor. I always refer to things as dwellings, and and when I'm talking about housing, I'm always thinking about dwellings and homes for people. So I come away from this discussion reminded of why it's such a significant topic. I feel anxious, to be honest with you. I feel anxious to be able to use the abilities and use the jurisdiction that we have to attenuate people's personal difficulties. That should be how we cast our minds to the housing topic. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I had to mute myself there as my teenage son was running up and down the halls behind me here. So it might override what you were saying. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. I found it very instructive, and I thought it was a productive conversation. Thank you to staff for organizing this. Just very quickly on the housing thing though, but I have a friend who just advertised her basement suite actually for somebody. She got over 100 people applying for that little one bedroom basement suite at $1,600 a month. Unbelievable. So, the conversation is very pertinent. It is a complex problem, no simple solutions. And I really do hope that we can make some headway going forward in Oak Bay as we develop our infill plan. And I hope those of you who've engaged this conversation here tonight will participate in the discussions and decisions that are going to go forward in a very short while. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's been really good listening to everybody.
Thanks, Councillor Ney. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And First of all, thanks to all the residents who have joined us tonight and raised some really important issues. And certainly on the housing issue, it is an emotional issue. It is certainly a critical issue. And I, in fact, have a family member who is at the mercy of the rental market. And it is just as cruel as trying to purchase a home. This is a cruel market. And I feel very strongly that yes, we have to do something about it. I'm not sure what that is. I feel rather helpless and anxious. In addition to feeling anxious, I feel helpless. So I'm hoping that through some really important work with our community and with 2 other levels of government, that we can find some solutions because the region itself is becoming unaffordable completely. So that's that. And again, thank you to staff for making this possible tonight, to all my council colleagues for being here to join in. It's been really hard over the last 2 years not to have the opportunities to sit together and talk to each other and spend time with each other. And I feel the same way about my community. It has been 2 long years of not being able to mingle and stop and chat, have neighborhood meetings, have large meetings at Monterey Center or at Windsor Park or at the church in North Henderson. Those are all the well-worn places that we really have enjoyed interacting with the community. So I'm hoping very much that we can do this in person the next time. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Green. We're at 8:03, so I'm not going to use up any more time here. I really just appreciate the respectful, thoughtful comments of everybody who's participated. I know you're right again, and Councillor Appleton, I appreciated your term. When people get boiled up about housing, I often try and turn the conversation to homes, and where people want to live as homes, and it changes the nature of the conversation, and I think we have to be mindful. That's really what we're talking about here, is making sure people have homes, not just they're not just an abstract thing. So I've actually found this a really interesting and thoughtful conversation, and I hope the people who are watching and participating got the answers and information that they were looking for. We will continue to do these, and I think they're a really important part of just having a dialogue with our community. As Councillor Green said, it's nice to do it in person. Certainly looking forward. I know all of council is to having events happening again and seeing people in person and having those opportunities. So I don't know, somehow my mood is rising with the temperature outside, and I just look forward to the chance to bump into people in the parks and the events going on, and look forward to seeing everybody out and about. So thank you, all members of council, for your thoughtful comments. Thank you to staff for helping all through the night, and we will adjourn here. I guess I need a motion to adjourn since we are officially a meeting. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Morris.